last time we had discussed about the secretion of HCl from the parietal cell. Secretion of HCl in the parietal cell. So in the parietal cell, let's just revise. Right? Let's just revise about the last class. So in the this is the parietal cell. This is the parietal cell. So in the parietal cell, there is in the parietal cell, the carbon dioxide and water, they combine together and it forms the carbonic acid. Okay, carbonic acid is dissociated. Carbonic acid is dissociated. I will show it. I'll revise it once more. Okay, so that it will be easier for you. This slide. So due to metabolism, the carbon dioxide is produced in the parietal cells. So carbon dioxide, it combines with the water to form the carbonic acid. Carbonic acid, it is dissociated into hydrogen and bicarbonate by the carbonic anhydrase enzyme. Okay, so the hydrogen that is formed, that is passed towards the lumen of the canaliculi of the parietal cell, whereas the bicarbonate, it is exchanged with the chloride. Okay, bicarbonate is exchanged with the chloride. So hydrogen ion, it is actively formed. Okay, hydrogen ion, it is actively formed into the lumen of the gastric gland, by the hydrogen potassium ATPase. Okay, hydrogen potassium ATPase actively forms, and it goes to the lumen. Then the bicarbonate that is formed here, bicarbonate is passed towards the interstitial fluid and towards the blood side with the exchange of chloride. So chloride ion inside the parietal cell, chloride ion that comes inside the parietal cell, it is transferred to the lumen of the gastric gland by the electrochemical gradient to balance the charges. Okay, hydrogen and chloride, to balance the positive charges, the electrochemical gradient favors movement of the chloride towards the lumen of the parietal cell. So this is the hydrogen potassium ATPase, it is the active transport, whereas the transport of the chloride, it is the passive transport. Okay, transport of the chloride through the electrochemical gradient is the it is the passive transport. Okay, it is the passive transport. So there in the when the bicarbonate that is exchanged with the chloride, bicarbonate ion, it goes towards the blood and it increases the alkalinity of the blood. Okay, it increases the alkalinity of the blood. The blood becomes more alkaline. Okay, bicarbonate goes inside the blood and blood becomes more alkaline. This is known as postprandial alkaline tide. Okay, this is known as postprandial alkaline tide. So in the lumen of the gastric gland, the hydrogen and chloride, they combine together and forms the HCl. Okay, hydrogen and chloride, they combine together and forms the HCl. Ultimately, the HCl is released, or it is it goes ultimately to the uh, lumen of the stomach. Okay, first it goes to the lumen of the gland, then through the contraction of the cells. Okay, through the contraction of the cells, mitochondrial cells are present in here also. So through the contraction, it goes towards the lumen of the stomach. First to the lumen of the gland, then to the lumen of the stomach. So the mechanism of the secretion of the mechanism of secretion of the mechanism of secretion of the HCl from the parietal cell is by different types of the neurotransmitters and receptors. Okay, so in the parietal cell, there is the M3 receptor, there is the CCKB receptor, and there is the H2 receptor. Okay, in the parietal cell, there is the M3 receptor, CCKB receptor, H2 receptor, there is the receptor for somatostatin. Right? So the M3 receptor, it is stimulated by vagus nerve. Okay, M3 receptor, it is stimulated by vagus nerve. When vagus nerve acts, vagus nerve is excited, acetylcholine is released. Acetylcholine, it acts on the M3 receptor. It stimulates the GQ subunit and increases the release of calcium from the endoplasmic reticulum of the parietal cell. When calcium increases inside the parietal cell, the tubular vesicles that are present in the parietal cells, they are fused to the they are fused on the apical cells of the parietal cell. The tubular vesicles consist of the hydrogen potassium ATPase. These hydrogen potassium ATPase, they are found in the internalized form in the tubular vesicles. When calcium level is increased, calcium causes the fusion of the tubular vesicles into the apical cells of the parietal cell. Then second is the gastrin. Okay, second is the gastrin. So gastrin, it is present in the pyloric part. Okay, so the stimulus for release of the gastrin, you will die soon. So the gastrin is present in the pyloric part. So stimulus for stimulation of G cells is from not from the acetylcholine, it is from the gastrin releasing peptide, which is secreted from the vagus nerve. Okay, gastrin releasing peptide is secreted from the vagus nerve that acts on the G cell. When it acts on the G cell, gastrin is released. Gastrin, it goes through the blood. Okay, it is the hormone, so it goes to the blood and it acts on the polycystokinin B receptor present on the parietal cell. When it acts on the parietal cell, it also causes stimulation of GQ subunit. There is the increase in calcium level, and the tubular vesicles that consist of hydrogen potassium ATPase, they will be fusing here, and hydrogen will be released into the lumen of the gastric gland. Likewise, the histamine. Okay, histamine. So histamine secretion is by the ECL cells, enterochromaffin-like cells. Okay, histamine is secreted from the enterochromaffin-like cells. There are enterochromaffin cells also, right? Enterochromaffin cells also, but those enterochromaffin cells, they will secrete the serotonin. But these enterochromaffin cells, enterochromaffin-like cells, they release histamine. Okay, enterochromaffin cells release serotonin, but enterochromaffin-like cells release the histamine. So these enterochromaffin-like cells, they are stimulated by acetylcholine itself. Okay, they are released and they are stimulated by acetylcholine. So acetylcholine is activating the enterochromaffin cells. Enterochromaffin cells release the histamine. That histamine, it goes to the blood and it acts on the H2 receptor present on the parietal cell. This is the parietal cell. So when it acts on the H2 receptor, there is the stimulation of GS subunit, okay, G protein coupled receptor, GS subunit, which increases the cyclic AMP level, and ultimately it will cause the release of hydrogen from the parietal cell. Okay, it caused the release of hydrogen from the parietal cell. Now we are targeting some drugs here. Okay, we are targeting some drugs here. So atropine, we are targeting on the M3 receptor. Okay, we are giving this drug atropine on the M3 receptor. We are giving cimetidine on the S2 receptor. Okay, when we give cimetidine, it will act on the S2 receptor of the parietal cell. When we give atropine, it will act on the M3 receptor of the parietal cell. When we give omeprazole, lansoprazole, these drugs, they will act on the hydrogen potassium ATPase. Okay, mainly we are targeting these drugs. Right? Among these, mainly we use this drug. Right? Omeprazole is mostly used, then cimetidine, ranitidine, these drugs are mainly used. Right? Cimetidine and ranitidine, omeprazole, these drugs are mainly used. Right? So I will proceed further. Okay, this was the revision of the last class. Right? This was the revision of the last class. So I will proceed further. So this is again the same. Atropine, it blocks the hydrogen ion secretion by inhibiting the cholinergic muscarinic receptors of the parietal cell, thereby inhibiting acetylcholine stimulation on the hydrogen secretion. Cimetidine, it blocks on the H2 receptor, thereby it inhibits the histamine secretion. Okay, so when histamine is blocked, histamine stimulation, it inhibits the HCl secretion. Right? Histamine secretion, it inhibits the HCl secretion. it is the proton pump inhibitor. It inhibits the hydrogen potassium ATPase pump. Okay, it inhibits the pump. It inhibits the pump, right? So this is also the same thing. Now let's see the control of HCl secretion. Control of HCl secretion. So this is the parietal cell. Okay, so parietal cell, it is controlled by the vagus nerve. Okay, right? Vagus nerve, it controls the secretory rate from the parietal cells. Okay, most of the GIT, it is supplied by the vagus nerve. Okay, parasympathetic nerve, vagus nerve. So the branch of the vagus nerve, it acts on the parietal cell. So vagus nerve, it increases the hydrochloric acid secretion from the parietal cell. Enterochromaffin like cell, it also increases the release of histamine. Histamine acts on the parietal cell. There is the HCl secretion. Acetyl, this is not the acetylcholine. Okay, in this figure there is written the acetylcholine, but this is not acetylcholine that acts on the G cell. Okay, acetylcholine is not acting on the G cell. This is wrong. But I got this figure in some book. I found it. It is quite well. So this is not acetylcholine. This is gastrin releasing peptide. Okay, the vagus nerve, branch of the vagus nerve that acts on the G cell. It is gastrin releasing peptide. Gastrin releasing peptide acts on the G cell. Gastrin is released. Gastrin acts on the parietal cell, and there is secretion of HCl. Gastrin also acts on the enterochromaffin cells, and it will causes the release of HCl from the parietal cell. And there is somatostatin secreting cells, that is the D cell. The branch of the vagus nerve acting on the D cell also secretes the acetylcholine, but it have the inhibitory action. When acetylcholine acts on the D cell, there is the release of somatostatin. Somatostatin inhibits the G cell. Okay, somatostatin inhibits the G cell. When G cell is inhibited, there is no secretion of HCl from the parietal cell because it inhibits the G cell and it inhibits the parietal cell as well. Okay, so if there is more acid, if there is more gastrin, then G cell is stimulated, that will inhibit the parietal cell. Okay. Now look at this 3 plus. Okay, there is 1 plus, 3 plus, and 1 plus. Right? So acetylcholine acting on the parietal cell. There is acetylcholine is acting on the parietal cell. Histamine is acting on the parietal cell. Gastrin is acting on the parietal cell. Among these three, okay, among these three, action of the acetylcholine, histamine, and gastrin. Histamine has the most potent effect on secretion of HCl from the parietal cell. Okay, among these three, you can see the three positive sign here that the histamine secreting cells is acting on the parietal cell. Okay, these three positive sign means that the histamine has the most potent effect on secretion of HCl from the parietal cell. Okay, am I clear? Right? So this is also this same figure. During the cephalic phase, there is the stimulation of the brain. There is the enteric neural activity is activated. That will activate the parietal cell. That will activate the histamine secreting cell. That will activate the gastrin secreting cell. Parietal cell will secrete the HCl. So this HCl, whenever it becomes in excess amount, okay, whenever HCl becomes in excess amount, the HCl, it will inhibit the gastrin secretion and it will stimulate the somatostatin secretion. Okay, right? HCl, if HCl is more secreted, then it will inhibit the gastrin secretion and it will stimulate the somatostatin secretion. So when somatostatin secretion is stimulated, parietal cell is inhibited. When gastrin secreting cell is inhibited, parietal cell secretion of acid is inhibited. Okay. So the agents that inhibit HCl secretion are acid. When there is acid, okay, acid is more in amount in the stomach, then there is inhibition of the HCl secretion. When there is somatostatin, okay, when there is somatostatin, then somatostatin inhibits the GCl and ECL cell and it will inhibit the parietal cell as well. Okay, gastric inhibitory peptide and so cholecystokinin, the hormone that is released from the duodenum, it will also inhibit the gastric secretion. Okay, cholecystokinin is the hormone secreted from the duodenum. It will inhibit the gastric secretion. Then prostaglandin E2, it will also inhibit the HCl secretion. Okay, prostaglandin E2, it stimulates the GI subunit of the G protein coupled receptor. Okay, GI subunit. So when that is stimulated, then there is the decrease in level of the cyclic AMP, and there is inhibition of HCl secretion. Okay, there is inhibition of HCl secretion. So the functions of the HCl, there are different functions of the HCl. So the function of the HCl is to activate pepsinogen to pepsin, to provide low pH environment for optimum pepsin action, to kill swallowed bacteria and prevent its growth, to promote the secretion of pancreas and bile, and it also helps in absorption of calcium and ferrum. Okay, iron. It also helps in absorption of calcium and iron. Then second is the pepsinogen. We have finished about the HCl. Now the turn of the pepsinogen. So pepsinogen, it is secreted from the chief cells or peptic cells of the gastric mucosa. Okay, it is secreted from the chief cells or peptic cells of the gastric mucosa. So these chief cells, they secrete the pepsinogen. Pepsinogen is the proteolytic enzyme. Okay, pepsinogen is the proteolytic enzyme. Pepsinogen is secreted. So this pepsinogen is converted into active form pepsin by the presence of the hydrochloric acid. Okay, if there is acidic environment, then pepsinogen is converted into pepsin. Once pepsin is formed, okay, once pepsin is formed, the pepsin, it again augments the conversion of pepsinogen into pepsin. Okay, once pepsin is formed, pepsin, it helps in digestion of the proteins into peptides and dipeptides. Okay, am I clear? So pepsinogen, it is secreted from the chief cells. Okay, chief cells secrete pepsinogen and gastric lipase. Right? Chief cells secretes the pepsinogen and gastric lipase. So this pepsinogen, it is converted into active form pepsin by the hydrochloric acid, which is secreted from the parietal cell. Okay, once pepsinogen is converted into pepsin, this pepsin again augments or it increases the conversion of pepsinogen into pepsin, and the pepsin that is formed, it converts proteins into peptides and dipeptides. Okay, right? It converts proteins into peptides and dipeptides. So the pepsinogen, stimulation of pepsinogen, it is again done by the secretin also. Okay, secretin, it is present in the duodenum. Secreting cells, they are present in the duodenum. Secretin acts, when secretin is released, it goes through the circulation, it acts on the chief cells, and it causes the release of the pepsinogen. When pepsinogen comes, the hydrogen ion, it acts, pepsinogen is converted into pepsin, right? So the function of the pepsinogen is, it helps in, the function of the pepsinogen is, it helps in digestion of proteins into peptides, dipeptides and peptides. Okay, it converts the proteases, peptones, polypeptides into the peptides and dipeptides. Right? It converts the proteases, peptones and polypeptides into peptides and dipeptides. So pepsinogen, it is secreted from chief cells or peptic cells. I know. So due to the action of the HCl, pepsinogen is converted into pepsin. Okay, pepsinogen is converted into pepsin. Pepsin again augments the conversion of the pepsinogen into the pepsin. Pepsin, it acts on the pH of about 2. Okay, proteins are converted into the peptides and dipeptides. Okay, peptides and dipeptides. So this is also the same figure, right? This is also the same figure. Whenever there is the increase in hydrogen ion, whenever there is the increase in the pepsinogen and gastrin, there is the whenever there is the distension due to the vagal reflex, the chief cells releases the pepsinogen. Pepsinogen is converted into pepsin. For this, the pH must be highly acidic. Once pepsin is converted, pepsin converts proteins into the oligopeptides. Right? Now another is the mucus cells, right? Mucus cells. So the epithelial cells of the stomach, they secrete the mucus and bicarbonate. Okay, epithelial cells of the stomach secretes the mucus and bicarbonate. So this mucus and bicarbonate, it is very very essential. Okay, mucus and bicarbonate, they are very very essential. If there is no mucus and bicarbonate, the HCl that is produced from the parietal cell, they will auto digest the stomach itself. Okay, they will auto digest the stomach itself. So the mucus, okay, the mucus layer, it helps in protection of the stomach from the gastric acid and from the mechanical injury. Okay, it helps in protection of the stomach from the gastric acid and injury from the mechanical injury from the food. Right? So this is gastric mucosal barrier. Okay, gastric mucosal barrier helps in prevention of auto digestion of the stomach. Okay, gastric mucosal barrier helps in prevention of the auto digestion of the stomach. Right? This question is has come many a times. Okay, this question has come many a times. Why stomach is not auto digested? Right? Why stomach is not auto digested? So for that question you have to answer like this. Okay. So there is the presence of mucus and bicarbonate which is released from the mucous cells of the gastric mucosa. There is the tight junction present in the epithelial cells. Okay, due to the presence of tight junction and due to the presence of the trefoil peptide, you have to include these three terms. Right? Am I clear? You have to include these three terms. One is the one is the mucus bicarbonate barrier. One is the mucus bicarbonate barrier. Second one is the presence of tight junction between the epithelial cells, and third is the presence of trefoil peptide. Okay, trefoil peptide is secreted from the mucus cell itself, and it helps in stabilizing the mucus and bicarbonate. That means it helps in holding the mucus and bicarbonate together. Okay, it helps in holding the mucus and bicarbonate together. So next time when you are asked why stomach is not auto digested, then what will be the answer? There is the secretion of mucus and bicarbonate from the mucus cells. There is the tight junction between the epithelial cells of the stomach in the stomach, and there is the presence of trefoil peptide. Okay, in the viva of this time, right? In the viva of this time of the 10th batch, the external asked this question to many of them, but none of them answered this question. Right? None of them answered this question. Why stomach is not auto-digested? No one was able to give answer. Right? So you people should be able to give answer of this question. Okay. You people should be able to give answer of this question, because this question has been asked in theory. It has been asked in the MCQs. It has been asked by the external examiner. This is the lead question of the external examiner, all of the external examiner. Okay, so you have to remember this. Right? You have to remember this. There is the secretion of mucus and bicarbonate from the mucus cells. There is the tight junction between the epithelial cells, and there is the presence of trefoil peptide which is secreted by the mucus cells, which helps in stabilizing the mucus and bicarbonate. So due to this, due to this the towards the due to this towards the towards the surface, at the surface, the pH is alkaline. Okay, the pH is alkaline, and due to this alkaline pH, any acid that comes here, it is neutralized by the bicarbonate. Okay, right? Am I clear to you all? Shall I repeat this again? Right? Shall I repeat this again? Okay, I will repeat this again. Right? I will repeat this again. So this is the gastric epithelial cells. Okay, so this gastric epithelial cells secrete the bicarbonate and mucus. right? And there is the tight junction between these epithelial cells. Okay, there is the tight junction between these epithelial cells, and there the mucous cells also secrete the trefoil peptide, trefoil, trefoil peptide. Okay, it secretes the trefoil peptide. So trefoil peptide, function of the trefoil peptide is um, it helps in stabilizing the bicarbonate and mucus. Okay, trefoil peptide stabilizes the bicarbonate and mucus. So the gastric, in the lumen of the stomach, the pH is highly acidic, and at the surface of the cell, the pH is alkaline. So by any means, if this pH, okay, if this highly acidic pH, highly acidic gastric juice, it comes in contact, it tries to comes in contact with the cell. Okay, it tries to comes in contact with the epithelial cells. This is neutralized. Okay, hydrogen, it comes, it is converted into carbonic acid. Carbonic acid is converted into water and carbon dioxide. Yes or no? Right? Hydrogen ion comes, it combines with the bicarbonate, carbonic acid is formed, carbonic acid is converted into the water and bicarbonate. Okay, so due to this reason, there is no autodigestion of stomach. The stomach is not autodigested because at the surface it is highly alkaline. The pH is highly alkaline. At the surface of the gastric epithelial cell, pH is highly alkaline, and and when hydrogen ion comes in contact with the epithelial cells, it comes in contact, it tries to come in contact towards the epithelial cells, bicarbonate ion neutralizes that acid. Okay, bicarbonate ion neutralizes that acid. Bicarbonate ion combines with the hydrogen ion, forms the bicarbonate. Bicarbonate is flipped into the water and carbon dioxide. Okay, so our meeting is going to be over. So you will join me after some time. Okay, about 1 minute is left. Right, about 1 minute is left. So you can join me after some time. Take a break. Just you can get up from the place you are sitting. You can stand up and be fresh. There is MCQs and one topic left. Right, you can get up from your sitting place. So why stomach is not autodigested, right? So this is the gastric epithelial cell. Gastric epithelial cells secretes the mucus and bicarbonate. Okay, gastric epithelial cells secrete the mucus and bicarbonate. So this mucus and bicarbonate, they forms the protective layer towards the epithelial cells. Okay, they forms the protective layer towards the epithelial cells. So at the lumen of the stomach, the pH is acidic, whereas at the surface of the gastric epithelial cell, the pH is alkaline. Okay, pH is alkaline. So pH is alkaline. So due to the presence of the gastric and mucus, okay, uh, due to the presence of the mucus and bicarbonate, due to the presence of the tight junction between the epithelial cells, and due to the presence of the trefoil peptide, the gastric epithelial cells, they become resistant to the acid which is present in the stomach. Okay, due to the presence of the mucus and bicarbonate, due to the presence of the tight junction between the epithelial cells, and due to the presence of the trefoil peptide, the gastric cells, they becomes resistant to the acid. Okay, they becomes resistant to acid, and they are not autodigested. So if there is some conditions, okay, if there is some conditions that uh, destroy this barrier. Okay, let's give an example. If you are taking high amount of NSAIDs, high doses of NSAIDs, okay, if you consume high amount of NSAIDs, then this layer will be destroyed. So there will be the chances of suffering from the gastric ulcer. Right? There is the chances of suffering from the gastric ulcer. If there is the infection by the bacteria, Helicobacterium pylori, H. pylori infection. So that will also destroy this mucus layer. So if this mucus layer is destroyed, then gastric acid, it can easily invade the gastric epithelial cells. Okay, gastric acid can easily invade the gastric epithelial cells. So that will cause gastric ulcer. Right? That will cause the gastric ulcer. So this is also the same. Right? So there is the high protective layer of the mucus. Right? There is the high protective layer of the mucus. If you consume more amount of the anti-inflammatory drugs, because prostaglandin is inhibited. So here the prostaglandins are also present in the mucus. Prostaglandins are also present. That causes protection of the gastric epithelial cells. Okay. So if you consume high amount of NSAIDs, high dose of NSAIDs for a long time, then that will cause the gastric ulcer. Okay, that will cause the gastric ulcer. So this is also the same, right? Gastric mucosal barrier components, tight junction between the epithelial cells and rapid turnover of the cells, mucus covering, synthesizing and diffusion of bicarbonate through the mucosal surface, synthesizing of prostaglandin, and there is one thing is missing, that is the trefoil peptide. Okay, that I have already told. Right? You have to include the trefoil peptide also, because trefoil peptide helps in stabilizing of mucus and bicarbonate. It doesn't cause separation of mucus and bicarbonate. It helps in holding, it helps in stabilizing the mucus and bicarbonate tightly together. Okay, one thing is missing, that is the trefoil peptide. Right? Prostaglandin is also there. If you are um, consuming the anti-inflammatory drugs, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, then that will inhibit the prostaglandin also. If prostaglandin is inhibited, then there will not be secretion of the bicarbonate. There will not be secretion of the mucus. Okay, there will not be secretion of the bicarbonate. There will not be secretion of the mucus. So that will invade the gastric cells, which ultimately lead to the gastric ulcer. Right? Which ultimately lead to the gastric ulcer. So now there is another question that is also very hit question, that is dumping syndrome. Right? That is the dumping syndrome. Right? So if the patient has done some gastrectomy, right? Gastrectomy, the part of the stomach, it is removed. Okay, part of the stomach, it is removed. Then the person suffers from the hypotension, hypovolemia, hypoglycemia, weakness, dizziness, and sweating after meal. So combined symptoms of these all is known as dumping syndrome. Okay, combined effect, all this combined effect is known as dumping syndrome. When there is partial gastrectomy, when the patient has done some partial gastrectomy, then whatever you consume, that will not be properly digested. Okay, that will not be properly digested. That will directly go into the small intestine, right? That will directly go into the small intestine. Okay, so small intestine, they will be absorbing the nutrients. Okay, it will absorb the glucose, right? It will absorb the glucose. So glucose, whenever it absorbed, immediately there is the release of insulin. Insulin causes the uptake of the glucose, so there is hypoglycemia. Okay, and there is hypovolemia and hypotension, and this is seen after consumption of the meal. Okay, after consumption of meal, right? You have to remember these three: hypoglycemia, hypovolemia, hypotension. Okay, so that the cucumber seed may consist of the indigestible cellulose that may be present, which cannot be acted upon by the gastric enzymes. Okay, cucumber seeds may consist of the undigestible cellulose that may not be digested by the gastric enzymes. Okay, it is like why we cannot digest the grass. The question is like why we cannot digest the grass. We cannot digest the grass, can we? Because
No, sir.
there are the indigestible cellulose. Okay, that cannot be broken by the enzymes that is present in our GI tract. Okay, right? Am I clear? This question will be asked. This question is asked many a times. Dumping syndrome. So you remember this, right? You remember this dumping syndrome. Okay. So after consumption of milk, there is hypoglycemia, hypovolemia, hypotension, dizziness, sweating after milk. Okay. After consumption of the milk, there is hypotension, hypovolemia, hypoglycemia, weakness, dizziness, and sweating. The combined effect is known as dumping syndrome. Okay, combined symptoms is known as dumping syndrome. Now here comes the intrinsic factor. The intrinsic factor, it is secreted from which cell? Parietal cells. Parietal cells secrete hydrochloric acid and intrinsic factor. Right? Parietal cells secrete the hydrochloric acid and intrinsic factor. So this intrinsic factor is essential for absorption of vitamin B12. Okay, intrinsic factor is essential for absorption of vitamin B12. If there is no intrinsic factor, okay, if there is no intrinsic factor, then vitamin B12 will not be absorbed. Vitamin B12 will not be absorbed. If vitamin B12 is not absorbed, then the person suffers from the pernicious anemia. Okay, person suffers from the pernicious anemia. So intrinsic factor is secreted from the parietal cells. Okay, it is secreted from the parietal cell. So if there is the gastric ulcer, okay, if there is the gastric ulcer, parietal cells, okay, the gastric cells, they will be destroyed. Okay, destroyed. Okay, when there is gastric ulcer or when there is gastrectomy, part of the stomach is removed, then there is the destruction of the parietal cell. Parietal cell will no longer secrete the intrinsic factor. If intrinsic factor is not secreted, then vitamin B12 is not absorbed. Okay, vitamin B12 is not absorbed. If vitamin B12 is not absorbed, then red blood cells cannot be made, because for the maturation of the red blood cells, this intrinsic factor is necessary for absorption of vitamin B12. Okay, intrinsic factor is necessary for absorption of vitamin B12, right? So the intrinsic factor, it forms the complex with the vitamin B12. Okay, there is no vitamin B12 receptor in the small intestine. Okay, vitamin B12 is absorbed in the small intestine, right? Vitamin B12 is absorbed in the small intestine, but there is no vitamin B12 receptor. Okay, for absorption of vitamin B12, it must bind with the intrinsic factor. Okay, I will show it in the figure later on. First, uh, understand this, right? I will show it in the figure later on. So, for absorption of the vitamin B12, it must form complex with the intrinsic factor. Right? It must form complex with the intrinsic factor. If vitamin B12, if there is no intrinsic factor and we are consuming vitamin B12, then vitamin B12 alone cannot be absorbed. Okay, for absorption of the vitamin B12, it must form complex with the intrinsic factor. Right? It must form complex with the intrinsic factor. Now look at this, right? So we are consuming vitamin B12 in the diet. Okay, we are consuming vitamin B12 in the diet. So this is the intrinsic factor. Okay, this is the intrinsic factor. So this intrinsic factor and vitamin B12, it combines, and when it reaches towards the small intestine, look at this, right? There is the receptor for the intrinsic factor in the small intestine, this one. Okay, this one is the intrinsic factor, right? So there is the receptor for intrinsic factor in the small intestine. So when we consume the vitamin B12, this intrinsic factor combines with the vitamin B12, and it gets easily absorbed into the small intestine. Okay, it gets easily absorbed into the small intestine. Once it goes inside, the vitamin B12 is absorbed, and intrinsic factor, it is again recycled. Okay, it is again vitamin B12 we are consuming from the diet. So this vitamin B12, it combines with the intrinsic factor. Okay, once it combines with the intrinsic factor, it becomes resistant to the digestion from the high acidic pH. Okay, it becomes resistant to the digestion. it binds and it goes to the small intestine. In the small intestine, there is intrinsic receptor for the intrinsic factor, and it is easily absorbed. Okay, it is easily absorbed. If there is no intrinsic factor, if there is no intrinsic factor, then it cannot form the complex. Vitamin B12 cannot form the complex. If vitamin B12 cannot form the complex, then it will not be absorbed. Okay, vitamin B12 will not be absorbed. If vitamin B12 is not absorbed, then the folic acid store of our body, it will be degraded. Okay, the folic acid stores will be degraded. That means folic acid is necessary for maturation of the red blood cell. I know folic acid is necessary for the maturation of the red blood cells. So if there is no folic acid in the body stores of folic acid, they are depleted, then folic acid will not be there in the blood or in our body, and that will lead to the pernicious anemia. Okay, am I clear? Am I clear? If you are not clear, then I will repeat it again. Right? Vitamin B12 पुग्यो ल पुग्यो भने तै पनि लास्ट एकचोटि भन्छ है त. Vitamin B12, it is we consume in the diet. It comes to the stomach from the parietal cells. There is the secretion of so this vitamin B12, it has the receptor, it has the binding site on the intrinsic factor. Once vitamin B12 binds to the receptor present on the intrinsic factor, it goes and it gets attached to the receptor present on the small intestine. Okay, there is no receptor for vitamin B12 on the small intestine. Okay, there is the receptor for the intrinsic factor. Right, there is the receptor. Look at this. There is the receptor for the intrinsic factor. So intrinsic factor and vitamin B12 combinedly it can enter. Okay, it can combinedly enter. Right? Otherwise, it cannot enter. Okay, otherwise it cannot enter. Right? So if there is some gastrectomy or gastric stomach is removed, or if there is helicobacter as pylori infection, okay, if we are consuming high amount of the NSAIDs, then this gastric gland will be destroyed. If gastric gland is destroyed, intrinsic factor will not be secreted. If intrinsic factor is not secreted, then vitamin B12 is not absorbed. If vitamin B12 is not absorbed, then there is the depletion of the folic acid level in our body. The body stores of folic acid will be depleting. Okay, body store of folic acid will be depleted. Once body stores of the folic acid is depleted, then once body stores of the folic acid is depleted, then uh, the red blood cells, they cannot be matured. Okay, red blood cells cannot be matured, and person suffers from the pernicious anemia. Okay, there is the difference in the pernicious anemia and megaloblastic anemia. Right, these two are different. Right, in megaloblastic anemia, there is the blastic cells are secreted from the bone marrow, but in the pernicious anemia, it is more or like the same, but it is two different. Pernicious anemia is due to the deficiency of the vitamin B12. Right? So we have already discussed about this. I know phases of gastric secretion. Cephalic phase due to this sight, smell, taste, thought of the food. Okay, cephalic phase is due to that. Gastric phase is due to this. Gastric phase is due to the presence of the food in the stomach due to the mechanical distension. There is the release of the gastric juice. Okay, mostly 60% is released, and there is this intestinal phase. Right? Now, peptic ulcer disease. So, peptic ulcer disease is an ulcerative lesion of the gastric or duodenal mucosa. So, it occurs whenever there is the loss of protective mucosal barrier. Okay, whenever the gastric mucosal barrier is lost. So, gastric mucosal barrier, whenever it is lost, or whenever there is the excessive secretion of the hydrogen ion, or whenever there is the excessive pepsin secretion. Okay, because pepsin is also the proteolytic enzyme. The cells, they consist of the proteins. So pepsin also digests the stomach cells. So the protective factors that is present in the stomach, I have already told. there is the mucus, there is the bicarbonate, there is the prostaglandin. Okay, there is the prostaglandin, there is the mucosal blood flow, growth factors. Okay, so these are the protective factors. So damaging factors are the high amount of the hydrogen ion, high amount of the pepsin, Helicobacter pylori. Okay, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, stress, smoking, and alcohol. These are the damaging factors. Right? These are the damaging factors. Right? Hydrogen ion, pepsinogen, Helicobacter pylori, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, stress, smoking, and alcohol. Right? Cinta, chillo. Okay, cinta, chillo. Right? Cinta linu bhaina. You should not take stress, and you should not take spicy food. Okay, you should not take stress. You should not smoke, and you should not take spicy foods. Okay, so these three are also the reason. Spicy foods also increases the secretion of the hydrogen. Okay, that will disrupt the membrane. Right? So this is the H. pylori organism that is investing. Okay, that is degrading the gastric mucosa. Okay, that is degrading the gastric mucosa, and it will ultimately lead to the ulcer. When there is ulcer, there is the when this organism is invading, it will uh, degrade the mucosal barrier. Okay, it will degrade the protective layer of the stomach. When this protective layer of the stomach is degraded, ultimately it will invade and it will create the ulcer. Okay, it will create the ulcer. Now gastric ulcer. So gastric ulcer, it is the gastric mucosa is damaged. Gastric hydrogen secretion is decreased because of the hydrogen ion is back through the damaged gastric mucosa. There is the increase in gastrin level, and there is increase in gastrin level, and there is decrease in hydrogen secretion. Okay, there is decrease in hydrogen secretion. The major cause of the gastric ulcer is the Helicobacter pylori. Okay, H. pylori. So H. pylori, it colonizes the gastric mucosa and it releases the cytotoxins that damages the gastric mucosa. Okay, that damages the gastric mucosa. Then another is the duodenal ulcer. In the duodenal ulcer, there is the damage of the duodenal mucosa. The gastric hydrogen secretion is increased. Excess hydrogen is delivered to the duodenum, that is damaging to the duodenal mucosa. Okay, gastrin secretion in response to meal is increased, although the baseline gastrin is normal. Okay, baseline gastrin is normal, but gastrin secretion in response to the meal is increasing. So H. pylori is again the major cause of duodenal ulcer. Okay, H. pylori is also the major cause of the duodenal ulcer. So H. pylori, what it does, it inhibits the somatostatin secretion. When somatostatin cells are inhibited, then that will not inhibit the HCl secretion, and that will ultimately increase the degradation of the gastric mucosa. Okay, if somatostatin is not secreted, then it will not inhibit the HCl secretion from the parietal cell. That means HCl will be secreting more, and it will inhibit the secretion of the bicarbonate. Okay, HCl secretion increases, bicarbonate secretion decreases. Okay, so if HCl secretion increases, bicarbonate secretion decreases, then it will not bicarbonate. If there is the insufficient amount of the bicarbonate, and it will fail to neutralize the acidic pH of the stomach. Okay, it will fail to neutralize the acidic pH of the stomach. Then there is the Zollinger-Ellison syndrome, right? Zollinger-Ellison syndrome. So when this occurs, when there is the tumor of the gastrin secretion, gastrin G cells, okay, gastrin secreting cells. When there is the tumor in the gastrin secreting cells, then Zollinger-Ellison syndrome is there. Okay, so when there is a tumor, the G cells, they will be secreting more amount of the gastrin. Okay, they will be secreting more amount of the gastrin. So when there is Zollinger-Ellison syndrome, the gastrin G cells, they will be stimulating more. Okay, G cells will be stimulating more. When G cells is stimulated more, G cells releases the gastrin. When gastrin is released, then gastrin, it stimulates the parietal cell. Parietal cell will cause the secretion of the hydrochloric acid, and it will cause the ulcer. Okay. So I think for today, this much. There are some MCQs left that we'll be doing it later on, right? Is there any
Okay.
confusion? We'll be continuing this class next time. We'll be doing the MCQs of this, and we'll be doing the gastric motility, right? For the gastric secretion part is finished. Now gastric motility is remaining. In next class, we'll be doing gastric motility, and we'll be doing this MCQs. We'll be solving these MCQs, right? Actually, I thought to finish the MCQs today also, but there is the time limitation we have. Right? Is there any confusion regarding the today's class? Thank you all of you for being patient and listening to me. Hey, thank you all of you. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you all of you. Coronavirus infection rate, it is increasing day by day. Right? It is increasing day by day. All of you, please do not go out of your house. Use masks. Wash your hands properly. Okay, wash your hands properly and stay at home. Take care of your family members. Okay, take care of your family members and don't get frustrated. Hey, don't get frustrated. Just go with the flow. Everything will happen good. Okay. Thank you all of you.